afternoon, everyone. What a gorgeous, beautiful day it is outside today. They don't come much better than this. The weather is absolutely perfect outside. We and Judy and I went out on the patio this morning, and yesterday we got a hankering to get some plants, so we drove down to the little town of New Summerfield down here. It's home to a whole host of greenhouses that they grow for a lot of these businesses around Texas, and I would imagine all down across the southeast here, where they supply places like Lowe's and Home Depot with plants. You can drive through there, and most of these places are wholesale greenhouses, and they have these, 20-foot wide by 100-foot long greenhouses by the hundreds down there along the highway. And like I said, you can't really stop in, but you can see and look across the fence. A lot of them have the sides rolled up, and you can see thousands and thousands of these beautiful flowers, just different kinds, and it's quite a sight to see. But there are a few greenhouses located along the highways there that do buy from them and offer a wide variety of plants and flowers this time of year. One of my favorite places, Judy said, I want to go buy some plants. I said, how about let's go to New Summerfield? So we drove down there, and we bought a carload of plants, and we had them sitting out on the patio this morning. We went out and looked at those flowers. Incredible beauty. Just this time of the year, our pear tree is all in bloom. Our peach tree that my dad gave me. My dad came over one time before he died, and he had this little bitty stick, and he stuck it in the ground. He said, I want you to have a peach tree so you'll remember me by. I didn't think anything about it. Well, now that thing's about 20 feet tall, and it had 200 or 300 blooms on it. Beautiful pink, purplish blooms. And I look at that tree and I remember him. It worked. I do remember him. I think about every time at this time of the year he wanted to have a garden. He wanted to get out there about December the 31st and plant his onions. And I'd be thinking about gardening about this time of the year, and he'd already have vegetables up and harvesting some of them. But this time of the year brings about, I guess, this sense of renewal, this sense of feeling alive after the dead of winter, and you think winter's never going to end. And then all of a sudden spring breaks out. The plants start blooming, and the sky starts changing, and the air feels different, and the trees start budding out. And you feel like you've got a new life again. You feel like starting over, don't you? And I think it's the perfect time of the year for the holy day season, don't you? For us to have a holy day that begins, as God told the Israelites, that this is the beginning of months for you. This is when it all starts in the holy day calendar, and I think that's so imperative, and it's just so logical, and it fits so perfectly and harmoniously into creation. I think that is beautifully put, and it makes such a deep, rich meaning for each of us when we observe the holy days during this season of the year. We, by the way, in 2 weeks are going to have the Holy Day weekend here, and we have plans to have lots of people from all over the country coming in. I think we're going to have a room full. I'm looking very much forward to it. I've talked to some of the folks that are coming, and it looks like we're going to have a great time beginning probably on that Friday or Thursday evening, and then, of course, the Holy Day, first Holy Day on the Sabbath, weekly Sabbath that week, and it's going to be lots of fun. I hope you're looking forward to it and making plans for it. Is it worth it? Is our struggle really worth it? Why is it so difficult to follow a righteous path? When you listen to the noise, and I like to call it that, of dozens of television and radio and internet, of voices, announcers, spectators and speculators, I should say, advisors, commentators, and so-called experts in media, when you listen to the pulse of the world, sometimes I get up in the middle of the night, I sleep really good till about midnight or 1 o'clock, and then I wake up and I'm wide awake. My brain starts working. I get up. Sometimes I'll turn the television on. I'll watch news channels from all over the world. The other night, I think night before last, I got up and turned it on, and there was this British news channel there, and these two left-handed, limp-wristed news commentators were there trying to give me some news about the world. It was totally embarrassing for me to even watch these guys. But when you consider what these people are telling us in the direction that the world is headed, it causes a whole litany of emotional responses from me, gut-wrenching responses when I see what's going on in the world. And when you're a Christian, you begin to consider the evil that is being perpetrated upon mankind as a whole. And I listened to some of Glenn Beck this week too, when he was talking about how the Federal Reserve and the lending of money by the trillions of dollars to these foreign companies that were former enemies of us during World War II, and how they're playing a whole different game than what the normal average industry out here in our country is playing. Corporations and institutions, of which we know little about, have become so enormous and so powerful that they supersede the economic status of even some nations of the world. And they have the power and influence to direct policies that directly affect the lives of millions of human beings on the earth and even in our country. These are able to govern the freedom and the financial outcome of cities and towns and local business. They can pass legislation that literally can affect whole industries. And I can attest to that, being in the oil and gas industry, because I know how legislation that is passed having to do with the environment, with OSHA and things like that, how it affects our industry in the oil and gas industry. But these huge segments of population can be subverted because of these legislations, and especially if they don't like the industry in which you work. I've often said to the guys at work, I'm glad I'm on my way out and not on my way into the oil and gas industry, because the legislation and the laws and the rules and the regulations that are coming into my industry they make it almost impossible for us to produce oil and gas. I mean, they keep fine-tuning what you have to do and the things that you have to follow, and the rules and the regulations and the policies and the stipulations and the safety rules and regulations, that is almost, it's a burdensome anymore. I told my boss one day, I said, they're taking the fun out of working in the oil and gas industry, because it used to be a lot of fun to me. It was challenging. It was a great thrill to produce something that was in need on the world scene, you know. When some of these institutions, these big companies, have their policies and their goals and their agendas as being directly contrary to the Word of God, then like I said, it stirs up feelings of worry and concern, even fear, and perhaps a sense of hopelessness among those who are trying to live a loyal and faithful life to God. I mean, they're completely contrary. It reminds me of the Apostle Paul when he talks about living this life, trying to live a spiritually led life in a physical world where the flesh and the spirit are contrary to one another. They can't ever agree. They're always at war one with another. When you look around the world and look around the country, you see deep concerns, and you have deep concerns, because I know I do. When I look at our economy and the financial, ever burgeoning financial crisis that we're headed towards, they call it the Great Reset that is coming, and how that's going to affect American families and families around the world, I can't even imagine what that will do. And we talk about climate change. That's something else that we are very concerned about, how it's going to affect our industry. Will they do away with the oil and gas industry? I mean, you talk about, I have this great big compressor setting out on one of our locations. It's a big mammoth of a machine, and it's got a big Caterpillar engine on it, and it runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That thing will not run without oil in it. I could pull the plug and drain all the oil out of it. It wouldn't last 5 minutes. It would come to a screeching halt, and it would be devastating to that engine. That's what I think when I think about doing away with the oil and gas and the coal industry in the United States. I can't imagine what it would be like. And I'll just say a comment about the strategic oil reserves. Did you know that this is the greatest draining of the strategic oil reserves ever in the history of America that is about to be brought about? I think it's 1 million barrels a day for the next 6 months. It's interesting, though, that J.P. Morgan said that they're not going to change their forecast for the oil and gas, or for the oil prices, because of the restrictions that's on the Russian oil exports. Even though we're going to give away our strategic oil reserves, it's not really going to affect the price of oil. It did momentarily. There's a little blip. The price of gas probably is going to drop. I was listening to this guy in a convenience store the other day with a cup of coffee in his hand telling me they ought to listen to that Mr. Biden there. Totally ignorant of what this guy is doing about draining reserves that are meant for war in times of need, when we as a nation are going to need those reserves to fight a mechanized, or to fuel ships and tanks and jeeps and things of that nature in times of war. I'll get off of that. What about the LGBTQ plus industry, or the movement, if you want to call it that, in our country? Mark said a lot about that just a moment ago. What about corruption in politics? That goes all the way to the level of the White House, I believe. How long can a person cover up embezzlement and money laundering that is so obvious that it seems to that they aren't held accountable, which cost taxpayers millions of dollars and even billions of dollars? I would hate to even know the number of what it costs American taxpayers. I could go on here and talk about racial division. It seemed to be sort of calm in our country, but now it's the flames are being fanned into an inferno now of injustice and racism, that we're all racist and we need to accept it and we need to swallow it and we need to pay for it. That's the way it's being portrayed to us. The whittling away of our military power, I could go talk about that. Did you see what happened down in Miami, Florida during spring break a couple of weeks ago or so, a week or so ago? How that these gangs and people are showing up there and protesting, and they're rioting, and they're going in the stores and turning over the Walmart shelves and just grabbing things and running out. Do you think those are kids on spring break? For years, the kids have been going down there on spring break, and they've been a peaceful sort of a atmosphere. I know kids like to go drink, and they have to, live it up life as you did when you were 18. So are they. So are 19, 20-year-olds. But to be protesting, walking down the middle of the streets, all these businesses had to close. They had to quit selling alcohol. And one store owner said that he was losing $10,000 a day because he had to close as a result of what's going on in the streets down there during spring break. And of course, that's moved now to our little favorite place, Panama City Beach, Florida, where it happened again. You think these people aren't being paid to go in and stir up discord in a state where a governor is actually battling some of these issues that we're talking about? He's got the guts enough to stand up against some of these issues. And now they picked the two hottest, literally and physically, I guess, the two hottest cities in the whole state of Florida to try to bring about these uprisings and these, insurrection. Mark mentioned the borders. I mentioned fuel prices. What about food? Have you been to the grocery store lately? Have you priced a new vehicle? Did you know that they shut down or suspended the operation of some, I believe it was Ford or GM truck factory, because they can't get these chips from overseas that we're so dependent upon our, lovers from overseas in the United States, that we can't have a little chip that keeps a whole $60,000 truck from cranking up and running and being able to sell it to the American public. These vehicles now, a friend of mine told me the other day, he went to buy a new vehicle. It was about $10,000 more than the list price because they don't have any, so the price is going up. Same thing in the housing market. We're seeing exactly the same thing. I believe it's all intentional. I believe that they're driving these things toward destruction. The Bible talks about cry loud, spare not, Show my people their iniquities and house of Jacob their sins. I can tell you that it is a difficult job. It's heart-wrenching to read all of this. I don't want to read these things to you, especially every week. It gets too much for me, and I know it's too much for you. But I want to give you today one of the simplest ways to have peace of mind. In the midst of all of this turmoil and chaos, you can only a person can only take so much. I can't, I have to turn the news off occasionally and let my brain rest, let my mind go back to a place of peace and tranquility. In Psalm 37, I'd like to read this to you today. I believe in this chapter, in this psalm here, I believe David discovered, or he had this formula for peace of mind. And he sort of lays it out for us here. He says in Psalm 37, now this psalm here is called an acrostic psalm. In other words, he took the Hebrew alphabet and he wrote several verses for each letter of that alphabet in this psalm. That's why it's at the length that it's in. He says, the very first thing he says is, fret not yourself because of evildoers. Now, I know that's hard to do. It's hard not to fret. It's hard not to worry and to be anxious about what we see reported in our news. The word fret means to be constantly or visibly worried or anxious. And I've been guilty of that in times past in my life when I watched things that I knew were going to happen to our country that are coming about now as a result of the decisions that were made decades ago. Do you think that what is happening to our country now is a result of decisions that are made right now? Or are these things that have gravitated over decades, wrong decisions to export all of our manufacturing overseas, to give all of our technology to all these other countries, and to export all of our jobs and all of our benefits to our people here in the United States to other countries? Or are we reaping a whirlwind, a downfall of those decisions that were made long ago? He says, don't fret because of evildoers, because neither be envious of the workers of iniquity. In other words, don't desire to be one of them. Just because they're getting rich and wealthy, some of these guys are making hundreds of millions of dollars. They seem to be so successful. For they shall soon be cut down like grass and wither as green herb. Now that word there, cut down, is like what God told the Israelites, that you'll be cut off from Israel. You'll be destroyed. You'll be cast out. Trust, he says, in the Lord. Confide in God. This is David telling me how to have peace of mind. Trust in God. That meant a lot to Israel because, they were promised to dwell in a peaceful land, and if they trusted in God, and he uses that term here. He says, and do good. And that's what I was saying, to live, to try to live a righteous life. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon wrote at the very conclusion of his book there, he said, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. So all the secret deals are not going unnoticed by God. He's fully aware of all the secret chicanery and deals and underhanded and, to me, treasonous acts, in my opinion, when it comes to our country. Some of these financial institutions that are out there are so big that they are not necessarily loyal to our country, because making money on the global scene is not patriotic. They want to make money off of everyone, and so whether it's at the destruction of our country, it doesn't really matter. That's unfortunate. He said, trust in the Lord and do good, and you shall dwell in the land, and verily thou shalt be fed. Delight yourself also in the Lord. That word delight there means to have great pleasure. You know, in Isaiah the 58th chapter, when Isaiah wrote, he said, "Why do you fast?" God is sort of talking to Israel, and he said, "Why do you fast? For strife and debate?" You should be fasting so that you loose the bands of wickedness. He says that you need to undo the heavy burdens. You need to let the oppressed go free and break every yoke and draw out your heart to the hungry, he said. Then, after you do all of those things, you will delight in the Lord. And he says, then I will cause you to ride upon the high places of the earth. That's the way Isaiah described having a delight in the Lord, is to do those things. Look back in Psalm 37, delight yourself also in the Lord, and he shall give you the desire of your heart. Commit your ways unto the Lord, trust also him, and you shall bring it to pass. In other words, that word commit means to roll upon or repose on, to just lay everything on God. You know, the Bible speaks a lot about committing. Here it's talking about committing your life to God. Most of the other places when you use the word commit, it's talking about committing adultery or committing lewdness or committing whoredoms or committing, sacrilege or whatever it might be, sins or offenses. But in this case, it's referring to devoting your life to God in his ways. And that's what David is trying to tell us here. To have peace of mind, you have to devote your life to God. And you got to put away a lot of the things that are distractions that interfere with your relationship with God. He said, and you will bring forth your righteousness as the light, and your judgment as in noonday. And he shall bring forth your righteousness as light, and your judgment as noonday. Verse 7, rest in the Lord. I pause here to say rest means a lot to the folks in this room. Not only did the Bible talk to us about the Sabbath day, in Exodus, I believe it's the 31st chapter, he says, my Sabbath shall you keep. And he goes on later in that chapter to say it's a sign between me and you that you are my people. But I believe it also means to rest in this psalm here. I believe he's talking about be silent for a moment. Wait for. Stand still. You remember when the Israelites were standing there on the shores of the Red Sea, and the Egyptian army was fast approaching through the Red Sea, and Moses stood up in front of the people when all the detractors were saying, here they come, they're going to kill all of us. And Moses said, stand still and see the salvation of our Lord. You see these Egyptians? I tell you, today you will see them no more. That's the kind of rest and standing still, I believe, that David was talking about here. We have to have that kind of dependency upon God to stand still and see his salvation come about. And it will come about. Let's go on here. He says, fret not yourself because of him that prospers in the way, because the man who brings wicked devices to pass, all of these, the rich and the wealthy and all of the planes and the ships and the yachts and all the things that they got. I had a thought on the way over here this morning. Do you suppose people that commit these acts, do they lay down at night and say, I should have done what God said instead today? Is that what's in their mind? I mean, really? Do they really think about God? Do they really think about, that really wasn't the right thing to do? I think tomorrow I'll get up and start a new day and turn a new leaf. Maybe they will at some point. But do you think that is their objective? Every day that they grind away, it says that they grind the faces of the poor. Decisions that they make that stick another million, 2 million, 10 million, 100 million in their pocket. Is it benefiting the poor and the fatherless and the widows? We'll see. He says, number 8, verse 8, cease from anger. I'm just finishing a book about anger. It's called Beyond Anger. And it's a book written about a man who realized, he woke up one day in his life and he realized, I'm angry all the time. Everything makes me angry. You know, there is a problem among our men, the men in our country, and I'll say this to women too, because there's another book called The Dance of Anger that was written specifically for women who are dealing with anger issues. But men walk around a lot of times at the boiling point. And it is an emotional state of mind that is a result of a lot of things. You know, human beings are complex organisms, aren't we? This anger can be caused by our upbringing. We could be abused. We can be humiliated in our childhood that makes a scar on us that we never get over. Maybe an embarrassing event that happened to us in our youth. We become self-conscious and maybe from being rejected, made fun of for some specific reason. Or maybe being berated by a parent all the time and told to shut up and you get over and sit down and shut up and don't you ever talk. And so this person that is shaped in this youth with all of these, abuses that can come from various directions, grows up and they begin to compare their life with other people. And they have this feeling of unworthiness. And they don't measure up financially. They don't measure up socially. They don't measure up athletically or sexually. And so they have an inferiority complex that they're carrying around with them that causes these feelings even more so of self-unworthiness. And they play this over and over again in their mind. The old tape recorder, I've talked about it. It's happened to me. You play these faults that you have in your mind over and over again, and those things can cause you to have even more difficulty and more anger in your life. So you don't have fun. You don't feel like you deserve it. You don't know how to be lighthearted. You're serious all the time. You're worried about money. You're hypercritical of the work that others do. Their work is never good enough. It never measures up to your standards. And nothing is ever going to work out. That's the outlook. And are super sensitive to criticism, especially from others and from family. And they take criticism deeply personal. These are some of the things that I discovered in this book. And because of all these factors, they are angry all the time. Many of these people don't even know that they're angry all the time. And their families know, and their coworkers know, and their spouses know, but they don't know themselves that they have been living a life in anger about everything. There are ways to overcome that, though. And this book kind of goes into detail about how to deal with your anger, how to not take yourself so seriously. And don't worry about what other people think about you. That's not really important. It's what you think and what makes you happy is the things that you should constantly be putting in your brain. And it's like overcoming alcohol or drugs or anything else. You have to work on it, certainly. But here, when I read this point here where he says, cease from anger. Jesus said, I believe it was Apostle Paul said, be you angry and sin not. But do you think Jesus ever got angry? I think he got blistering mad on occasions. When you go into a synagogue and you flip tables over and you take a whip and you drive the animals out and tell them, get out of here. This is the house of God. This is supposed to be the house of prayer. And you've made it a den of thieves. You think he didn't raise his voice? He was angry. He was boiling over with anger. But he was righteously angry. And there's a difference, isn't there? We need to work on our anger and forsake wrath, he goes on to say here. Fret not yourself in any wise to do evil. Don't take on that evil tone. For the evildoers shall be cut off, but those that wait on the Lord, they shall inherit the earth. And Jesus said that over and over again. The meek shall inherit the earth. God's word says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the eternal. We'll go over in Revelation, the 18th chapter. You don't have to turn there. It says, come out of her, my people, and be not partakers of her sins, that you receive not of her plagues. In Revelation 13, he said, he that leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He that kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience of the saints. All of these things are going to come to pass because it tells us that this beast power that's spoken of in the book of Revelation is eventually going to overcome the saints, their work, their lives. Even when that comes to pass, we are to remain patient and we're remain faithful. And I remind you of the list of all those in Hebrews, the 11th chapter, how it talks about what they endured. They lived in caves. It says they endured pain. They endured suffering. They endured torment. They endured abandonment, persecution, and in some cases, even death. At burning, being, whatever, crucified as it was in Jesus' case, but they remained faithful even to the end. The older I get, I realize that I need patience. I have more patience than I did when I was a young man. When you're young, you want it now. Little bitty children, my grandchildren, they want it right now, and now is not soon enough. As you get a little bit older in your teen years, you still want things now, but you realize you got to wait till the bell at school rings before you can get out and go to the playground. And then when you get a little older and you're first married and you go into your job, you realize I can't have fun till the weekend because I got to get off work, got to go home, mow the yard, do whatever, And as you begin to get a little older, you realize I can wait a week or I can wait a month. I can even wait a year. Judy and I talk a lot of times, let's wait till next spring or next year, next fall, and then we'll do this project. We'll be a little better financially to take on a project, and it's no big deal. But it's come over a long period of time. I'm almost at the end here now, and I'm just now getting the patience that I should have had decades ago. And I still have a long, long ways to go. I still need to learn more patience. Let's finish up here. He says, for yet a little while in verse 10, and the wicked shall not be. Yea, thou shalt diligently consider his place, and it shall not be. In other words, you're going to look around and try to find a wicked person, and they're not going to be there. The Bible talks about the destruction of the wicked. All of those that hate God, hate his way of life, and hate you are going to be like those Egyptian soldiers were to the Israelites. They're not there anymore. They're gone. I don't know how to describe that scene or that feeling of knowing that tension, that stress, that anger, that fear that I have will be gone. And I don't have to get up in the middle of the night and turn on the news and wonder what's going to happen tomorrow. Verse 12, where did I end up? 10. But the meek shall inherit the earth and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace. The wicked plotted against the just, and they gnashed upon him with his teeth. The Lord shall laugh at him, for he sees that his day is coming. When you read the book of Revelation, it talks about the great day of God Almighty and who shall stand in that day. I wonder when I hear people make some of the statements they do on international television and news and the arrogance with which they speak as if they are in charge of this world, it makes me shudder because I hear in the background the rumblings of the armies of God approaching. And it's going to take over this world. It says people are going to just fall down and their bones are the flesh is going to melt off of their bones at his coming. The wicked will. I didn't write a conclusion for this sermon today because I was late this morning. I slept in this morning. Judy didn't wake me up because she knew I needed the rest. But I wanted to give you some sense of peace that God's word offers. And David here, in amongst all of his troubles and trials and persecutions and the people that laughed at him and made fun of him, and even though he was a man who was after God's own heart, who wrote 150 of these psalms, or at least the most part of them, always had God in his forethoughts and in his mind, and he always knew God was going to deliver him. And I want us to have that same hope and that same feeling that in the end we win.